Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and what I hope to do is not to just do all the talking, right? And that's going to depend on you. I'll do my part. We'll see how it goes out there. So when it comes to the legacy of the contributions of Black Americans, and even that title itself, one that has gone through many different iterations, from Negro, colored, Bilalian. I don't know, is anybody familiar with Bilalian? Okay, Bilalian, African American, and of course Black, right? And that is kind of turned into a catch-all for anything, I guess, darker than the paper bag, or anything that looks to come out of Africa that is here in America, right? But the diaspora is wide, right? So that's a term that is continuing to be defined as we move forward. But I want to make this kind of local, because when we think about the terms, it's such a huge term, and the contributions have manifested in so many different ways across the nation, across the world. But I want to talk about the contributions that I have been able to witness, that I have been able to benefit from right here in Chicago. Now, how many of you are Chicagoans? Anybody here? Local? Oh, good. Alhamdulillah. Chicago is in the house. And for everyone else, welcome. I'm glad that you all made it here safely. Inshallah, you're enjoying yourselves. But the history of Black contribution and achievement in Chicago is one that is really, I think, emblematic of a spirit of resilience and just persistence that has kind of come to represent what it means to be Black in America. Chicago's Black neighborhoods are Black neighborhoods because they were the only neighborhoods that they were allowed to go into. There was a policy called redlining. And that basically meant that you could only live where they said you could live, right? And for Chicago, that was the South Sides and the West Sides, right? And these became areas that were, once they moved in, they were stripped of social services. Police began to invert their presence. That means that they no longer served to protect the people. They basically served to terrorize the people. And the people that were coming here, these were people that were coming from the South generally, and they were trying to escape the horrors of Jim Crow. They were trying to escape the horrors of white supremacy as it existed in the Ku Klux Klan, right? Lynchings and such. So how does that come together with, in particular, how does that come together with Black Muslims, right? Well, how many of you have heard, I know you all should have heard, you have heard of the Nation of Islam? Everybody, right? Now, unfortunately, and I should say this, I'm gonna preface, I'll put this right in the middle before I get into this. So my parents, I am a second generation Muslim. My parents came into Islam, into the Nation of Islam during the time of Honorable Elijah Muhammad back in the early 70s, well, late 60s, early 70s. After which he was succeeded by his son, Imam Mu'adh Muhammad. May Allah be pleased with him, have mercy on him, grant him paradise for all of his contributions. Does anybody know who Imam Mu'adh Muhammad is? Okay, that's good, that's good. So we have such a great tradition of leadership emanating from different communities that have served to bring people together, uplift them, bring them to this message of Islam. And we don't really know, we don't know all of them, right? We don't know all of them, but he's definitely one. Don't look back at him. He's just doing, he's just doing his job. It's okay. But he's definitely one that you want to know. So if you don't know about him, he's somebody that you should look up. So anyway, my parents, they, when he became the leader and there was a shift, and I'm assuming that there is an understanding, first of all, the Nation of Islam, it was a different theology, but with the same mission of any religion, which is to dignify its adherents, right? Which is to uplift those people, to give them a sense of purpose, a sense of understanding of their own worth, their value. So what he did was monumental, getting people to, like, it's hard to change a habit, right? It's hard to, if you used to brushing your teeth a particular way, just think how hard that is to, like, you're gonna all of a sudden switch to your left hand, or you're gonna use a different toothbrush or whatever, right? But to change your whole theological disposition, your whole understanding, to go from an idea that one particular group of people is the devil, right, to understanding the devil as a mindset, to understanding that the religion itself, there is a universal practice, universal understandings of it, and to move away from a mythology that is constructed for the reasons of dignifying people, right, but was needed for that particular time. That's monumental, right? And I could probably talk for hours on that, but I won't. So when he became the leader, my parents, they, along with many, many others, right, followed that leadership. And that leadership, so I'm a product of that leadership. I'm a product of that experience. Now, but I want to go back to when I asked you if you knew about the Nation of Islam. And I talk about redlining, and I talk about people that were fleeing from the South and the horrors of life, that existed for Black people during those times, and how the nation fits into that. And understand this, the label Muslim is absolutely appropriate for those people. Absolutely appropriate if you understand what it means to be a Muslim, to have a disposition, to have a commitment toward justice and standing up for human dignity. That is exactly what those people did at that time. The nation, they went into neighborhoods that were stripped of social services, and they became the stewards of those neighborhoods, right? I mean, everybody understands the term Khalifa, right? What's Khalifa mean? Somebody tell me real quick. What does it mean? Just shout it out. That's right. Caretaker. Yeah. Yeah, stewardship. That's that. Matter of fact, I love that term, stewardship. They became stewards of their communities. That's what it is to be a Khalifa. It's to be a steward, a caretaker. We enjoy having titles, right? This, blah, 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 whatever, right? But nobody wants to be the janitor. Nobody wants to be the guy that has to sweep up after everybody else, to move the obstacles, to make existence safe. Nobody, we don't really care about that person. But that's an absolutely essential part of society. And that's what the nation was. That's what this group of people who represented Islam, what they were for their communities. So the contributions, there are too many really for me to enumerate right now. But I'll say the biggest contribution that came up out of that was a group of people that were willing to identify themselves as the other, identify themselves as Muslims, because prior to 65, I believe, the term Black Muslim was basically the definition for what it meant to be a Muslim in the United States of America, right? So today we have a beautiful representation of diversity, and that diversity is indebted to those men and women who had the conviction, who had the bravery to stand up and be something that most people had never heard of, right, out loud. And not only to say that, but to tell the power structure that had ran folks up out of their hometowns, that sought to neglect them and oppress them in these new spaces, that these were the only spaces that they could live in, and told them, we don't really care about what you're doing. We're going to take care of ourselves. We're going to see to our needs. I don't know if you all are aware of this. We have an opioid crisis today, right? Now, of course, the opioid crisis of today was the crack crisis of back in the 80s, right? That was ignored, but now it's opioid crisis, right? Substance abuse continues to be an issue, continues to be a problem, but the most effective substance abuse program in the history of the United States occurred under who? Can anybody tell me? That's right. That's right. Under the leadership of Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam, they took the throwaways of society, and not just the throwaways, because I don't want people to have the idea that those who bore the label of Muslims were simply just folks that, just the losers. That was absolutely not the case. But just as we have substance abuse issues today, we had those same concerns then. But they had a mechanism that was so powerful that it turned people around. It turned men and women around, and it really became a model that it does not get the credit that it deserves by any means at all. It's not talked about. Most folks don't even know about it, but they were able to do what they did really because they did something I think that was almost unheard of, or that we don't really have in these kind of clinical practices of medicine and therapy. And that was they entered into these relationships with a little word called love. The Black Power movement, the Black love, right? These things, we hear about these things, but we don't really understand that a lot of these things are traced back to the way that these early Muslims conducted themselves. The views that folks like James Brown, he had the song, "I'm Black and I'm Proud," all right? They were very much aware of these early Muslims, the love that they had for themselves, the way that they carried themselves, and that was infectious. It was something that it kind of bled out into the broader Black community. All right, so the contributions, I think, is a contribution of spirit. It's a contribution of attitude, of awareness. And it's a contribution that it goes beyond just having dark skin, just being, if you want to get into, now we talk about being melanated, it goes way beyond that. It goes into having the conviction and having the belief that you are good as God made you. You are good as Allah made you, right? And that continues to be a really big discussion, a big problem. And we're hearing it on news now. They talk about white nationalism now. Nobody talked about white nationalism, in the 80s, 90s. That was not a discussion, all right? But as we're talking about these things, we have to realize that they have a counterpoint. And the counter to these things has always been, a love of self. And I don't think anybody has exemplified that better in our nation's history than this group of people that came from being despised, that came from being tortured, exiled, at every point, from an individual basis to the systems and structures throughout society. Then this early group of Muslims, people who bore the name of Muslims, who took on the name of Muhammad, right? Muhammad is the most, I think it's still number one, isn't it? Y'all know? In the country? Whoa. Not globally, but the country.
Last survey of names just came out about 2 weeks ago. And Muhammad's leading.
Y'all know they mad. Y'all know they mad.
I know.
They mad. Just for
Aliyah is the email.
really.
Yeah, I can see that.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. That what we take for granted today, there was a price to be paid for that. There was a price to be paid for that by men and women who did not cower. They didn't hesitate to say, I'm a Muslim. My name is Muhammad. Right? And I'm good with that. And I'm going to take care of my community. I'm going to live my best life. Before it was, people was even talking about living their best life. They were living their best lives, right? So it's a contribution of spirit, right? It goes beyond, I could rattle off so-and-so invented this, invented that, right? And those are wonderful things. Those are wonderful things. But the contribution of spirit, of attitude, right? Of embodying principles of justice and mercy, That is something that has stayed with us as a community, and we're the beneficiaries of that, regardless of our madhab, regardless of whether we were born here or we have immigrated. Also, I got to remind you all. You all know Chicago is the what to Mecca. Chicago is what? What's to Mecca to what? Mecca to what? Word association. Mecca. What comes after Mecca? Medina. Chicago is the Medina of the United States. Who knew that? Did y'all know that? It's the Medina. In terms of Islam, so we refer to Chicago. We refer, to Chicago as the Medina. So the nation began in Detroit, temple number 1. Temple number 2 was right here. If y'all have the time after the conference, I don't know if you all are going to be here long enough, but I would make my way over to the Chicago History Museum. There is an exhibit that'll be there through 2021 of May. I don't know if you'll make it back, but it's American Medina, Chicago Muslim Stories. And so I had the pleasure of being on the advisory committee for that exhibit, but it gives you a picture of the beautiful, diverse history of Muslims in the Chicagoland area, from Native American to Bosnian, African American, just going down the line, Palestinian, everybody, Egyptian. So these are things, when we think about the beautiful diversity that we have, remember, the diversity begins with one, right? Allah says we have created us out of a single soul. From that soul, its mate, from the two, scattered countless men and women, right? Like seeds throughout the earth. The diversity still begins with one. So the diverse community that we have here, that we cherish, that we love, we appreciate being a part of, it began with a group of people that took on the burden, took on the responsibility of calling themselves Muslims, of living Muslim lives. I mean, if you know anything about, like I said, if you know anything about that experience, please know that Allah judges us all according to our intentions. He judges us according to our commitment to justice, the conviction that we live with, the principles that we uphold. And these were Muslim principles then, they're Muslim principles now. I thank Allah for allowing us to come into a universal understanding as exemplified by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to have the guidance of the Quran to really frame the contributions of the Black, Muslim, African American, Bilalian, Negro, colored, whatever label you affix to this people. I am grateful. I'm grateful to be here and to be a beneficiary of that struggle and those contributions. And inshallah allows us to add to those contributions. And hopefully, as I close, hopefully knowing about those contributions and knowing about that commitment to living a principled life and have a principled posture, that it also emboldens each and every one of us in those spaces where we may be the only one or we are in the minority, and to understand that somebody did it before we did, so we know we can do it too. So that's all I have. Assalamu alaikum.